the Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta tier list post YCS Costa Rica. Today, big dog, I am going to be rating the most popular and powerful Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks on the tier list to give you insight on what are the best, all the way to what is Arby's tier. Of course, big dog, as per usual, I hope that your day is going phenomenal. But if it isn't, don't let what happened at the beginning of your day ruin the rest of your day. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, as I stated before, big dog, I did take some of the most popular Yu-Gi-Oh! Strategies, but this wouldn't be a TheCaliEffect tier list without taking your advice as well. I took some of the most popular strategies that you guys posted down below in the comment section, and if you guys continue to do that, not only will I make an attempt to respond to your comments right then and there, I'll also keep that in mind for the next tier list. So keep them coming, big dogs. Now, the meta tier list is going to be describing how powerful these Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks are against the best decks in the game. It's a little bit different than our rogue tier list where we go against some of the most popularly played cards, so I want you guys to pay close attention. It's really important. I talked about this on Monday's video, but the best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Are the Snake Eyes deck and also the Fire King deck. You can play this as a pure Snake Eyes deck, which is really good at being able to pop off and summon huge monsters, synchro summoning combo, or you can play the Fire King version, which I would say is a little bit weaker, but for more or less against the other decks, it's just as strong. This deck is unfair because it can summon a plethora of monsters, and every single one Yu-Gi-Oh! Card does multiple things, so it's really hard to stop. Now, the rest of the strategies on this tier list are going to be based off of how well they can compete against the top meta Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks, because technically you can say for right now we are in a tier 0 format. Let's go ahead and start off with Branded. This deck is incredibly good at dealing with the Snake Eyes engine. The main reason is because of Mirror Jade being able to permanently get rid of those cards. But another thing is that the deck is incredibly good against interruptions. I actually mentioned this in my top 5 meta decks, and I would put it in the next best Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. Literally, this may be the next best, strongest Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck after the Snake Eyes strategies. Not only does it have natural resistances to the cards that players play to be able to beat the top meta strategies, it's also a strategy that can summon Gimmick Puppet Nightmare, which completely shuts off a lot of decks in the game. Branded is incredibly strong, and that actually leaves us in an interesting predicament. Chimeras were always thought of as a better version of Branded. It allows you to be able to summon powerful monsters like Chimera, the mythical flying beast, but also can pivot more into those Fiend and Illusion monsters, giving way to summoning some crippling Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards like the End of Anubis. Unfortunately, I think cards like that are really powerful in this meta, but serve as a point of weakness for the deck as they can be bricks and sometimes not always optimal against every single Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck. I don't want you guys to think any different of Chimera. It's still a really good Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, but I'm going to put it into can compete. Chimera doesn't have any natural ways to be able to stop the Snake Eyes Fire King strategy that Branded does it, but it still is a really powerful functional Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck that can do a lot of things and top at the regional level. Drytron was a request by you guys. Drytron is a deck based off of being able to summon level 1 machine monsters to your side of the field and gain ritual monsters. Some of its most powerful cards it can summon is Draconits, which is untargetable in 4,000 attack. That can be a complete terror. But then it can also use cards like Natasha to be able to steal your opponent's monsters. I personally think that Drytron is in the Arby's tier. Don't get me wrong, when you get going with Drytron, you're almost impossible to stop. But with players playing more cards like Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion, DD Crow, and the Snake Eyes Fire King strategy being able to subvert a lot of Drytron's strengths, it doesn't necessarily make it an easy deck to play in this format. Labyrinth. Now, because of the ban list, a lot of people were saying that Labyrinth was going to be the next best Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck easily. Unfortunately for those people, I was pretty much right. Labyrinth has not made a significant impact in today's meta over the course of the format and had 0 tops in YCS Costa Rica. Even so, I'm still going to put Labyrinth into can compete. I know some Labyrinth players that are cooking up some mad goo with the deck. It's starting to become less and less of a trap-based Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck, and more towards the line of Fluundereeze. What I mean by that is that this deck can actually summon the Barrier Statue monster, which happens to be good against Fire King because it's dark, and sit on it. They can also protect it and recycle it. And then of course the normal things that Labyrinths do with Welcome and Big Welcome and using Transaction Rollback to copy their effects. It's a deck that does have its utility tool, but players need to learn how to use the correct utility tool against some of the top decks in the game. Pure! Now Purely is in an interesting spot, I would say. We see Purely tops here and there, which complexes me because the deck is almost non-existent. I think Purely is so incredible because of how many non-engine cards you can play to be able to get you so much advantage. Using any Purely card and discarding cards like the Black Goat Laughs not only gets you into your engine, but also provides a form of interruption. I still think that Purely takes a really good pilot though. Purely seems like a straightforward Yu-Gi-Oh deck, but the big problem with the strategy is that once you go against other decks, you need to be able to time your cards correctly. I think that takes a brilliant pilot, especially considering that there are easier decks to play right now that give you a little bit more reward. Now, Rescue Ace is the forgotten fire deck that people have left to the wayside. Ever since Rescue Ace Airlifter was limited to 1, the deck has been almost non-existent. I think that Rescue Ace is still a strategy that can compete though. If you think about it, Rescue Ace still is a Snake Eyes Yu-Gi-Oh deck, meaning that it still has the exact same unfair Yu-Gi-Oh combos. The difference though is that this deck can set up some pretty powerful spell and trap cards that not a lot of the strategies are really well prepared for. Rescue Ace may not have the matchups against decks like Fire King and Snake Eyes, but it has some pretty solid matchups overall against some of the other decks in the game. The crazy thing about Tier Limits is that it's just a deck that will not die. Even with losing Kelbeck and Yugioh, this deck still finds ways to be able to compete. Right now, I think both of the Ishizu Shuffler cards are amazing. They're easy counters to the Fire King strategy. The only problem with that is that those cards are limited to 1. I think with Tier Limit, the enemy of your enemy just might be your friend, as this deck not only does have the Ishizu Shufflers, but is one of the few decks where Shaddoll Fusion can be main deck, because even if you aren't using the Shaddoll combo to be able to out your opponent's Fire King or Snake Eyes board, you're still being able to set up your Tier Limit plays. I'm going to go ahead and say that this may be one of the next best Yu-Gi-Oh decks. I think that it's an incredible bold claim to put Tier Limit this high, but if it pans out correctly, this will be one of the strongest decks in the game because of how well it plays itself against the Snake Eyes Fire King strategy. Call it a bold take if you will, but I think Tier Limits may have everything it needs to be able to douse out Fire deck. Black Wings is another strategy that you guys requested to be on the tier list, and I actually think that Black Wings are stronger than what most people think. The Black Wing strategy is built on being able to summon powerful synchro monsters, but looking at its most powerful monster, Blackwing Dragon forces your opponent to pay 700 life points every time they activate a monster effect. As you already know, decks like Snake Eyes and Fire Kings activate a ton of monster effects, so putting 2 to 3 copies of this card means that your opponent either has to deal with the monster or find a way to get rid of them before they lose all of their life points. I think because of this, Black Wings, part of me wants to put it in the Arby's tier because there is still problems with Black Wings. Inconsistency sometimes, and then it's a little bit power crap. But overall, I think because the Bestial monsters are making a big splash, I'm going to put it in takes a really good pilot. I think that dedicated Blackwing players can make something out of nothing with this deck, and being able to take locals with this deck is something within range. Flame Swordsman was the deck that we all wanted to be one of the best. I mean, if you look at it historically, all of the Joey Wheeler strategies have been less than stellar, but Flame Swordsman actually gave us a competent strategy and a way of being. The ultimate Flame Swordsman is pretty much Zodiac Trident, but we're not in 2017 anymore. Infernal Flame Swordsman has been heralded as one of the best versions of the deck. I would put it in... Man, this one's tough, but I think Arby's tier is where it needs to be. The problem with the Infernal version of Flame Swordsman is that you play more cards that don't do anything to stop your opponent, only to get an extra negation. But if you play a pure Flame Swordsman version, you're relying on Fiend's Gear Free to do the heavy lifting alongside of your ultimate Flame Swordsman. That is not enough in today's Yu-Gi-Oh! I will say about this bottom Arby's tier is that these decks can 100% compete at locals, but once you start going to a regional level and above, you will see some problems by round 2. Voiceless Voice is the new kid on the block. This deck is built off of being able to summon Skull Guardian and bringing loads to the side of the field. Ultimately, the longer that this deck lasts, it will generate more and more advantage. I think that this deck is easily one of the next best decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Not only is it getting more support in the future to make it stronger, it's one of the very few strategies that's almost built to beat the Snake Eyes strategy. The deck can negate summons with Seravis and can naturally play cards like Summon Limit to be able to prevent the Snake Eyes strategy from propelling forward. This is easily one of the better decks, and again, like I said, will only get stronger. Madolche, we're getting into more of requested decks. Now, Madolche can play the Ishizu Shufflers. That's good. It also has Tiramisu to be able to get rid of your opponent's cards. But the biggest problem with Madolche is that it's summon reliant. If your opponent can check your summons, then you're in a really bad spot. I would put Madolche in the Arby's tier right now. A strategy that can compete at the locals levels, but anything after that, I'm telling you, you might have problems after round 2 in a regional. Still, one thing I would like to say about Madolche is that once this deck does get going, it is incredibly hard for any deck to stop. Being able to non-target shuffle your opponent's cards back into the deck is huge because they don't have the graveyard access to them. And it's a deck that can OTK as well as play cards like Herald of Orange Light. Madolche is really good. Now, I would say that things have changed for Orcus because of Fire Kings. Players are playing those hand traps like Ghost Spell and DD Crow, which does help the deck a little bit, or hurt the deck a little bit. There's also even a little bit of the Bestial Resurgence that we've been seeing here and there, and cards like Dimension Shifter. I think that if you're a skilled Orcus player, you can play around those particular cards, maybe even top or even win a regional here and there. But as far as YCS level, I'm not 100% sure if that might be the way for Orcus. Orcus is a consistently good deck that can play into the grind, but if you can stop them from grinding, you almost auto-win against the deck. Sprite. Holy crap, we have not seen Sprite in quite some time. One of the best things about Sprite is that Gigantic Sprite can prevent the opponent from summoning huge monsters on your turn. Yeah, I think that's where it stops. I would say the problem with Sprite right now is that a lot of the fire monsters are just huge, and Sprite will consistently struggle if you can just summon huge monsters to the side of the field to be able to combat it. I don't think that Sprite is bad, but I would say it takes a really good pilot. This is a deck that's going to be reliant on going first and setting up its board. If it does, it can almost beat any deck, but anytime it goes second or anytime your opponent summons those big monsters that don't need to activate their effects, you're in trouble. Raid Raptors. Now, I actually did a testing video of Raid Raptors, Big Dog, and I have a deck profile for you to be able to check out. Raid Raptors is a pretty good combo deck that can be built on summoning unaffected monsters. The best thing about these unaffected monsters is that Raid Raptor Ultimate Rising Rebellion Falcon, I know I said that card's name wrong, can destroy all of your opponent's cards, and then it has XC material, inflict damage, which a lot of times can be gained. I think if your deck can make one unaffected monster, that's okay. But if your deck can consistently make 3, I would put Raid Raptors in the can compete category. This is a deck that I expect to top multiple regionals over the course of the format and probably even sneak into a few premier events. It's crazy consistent and it's ridiculously resilient. I just don't think it has enough tools against the Snake Eyes strategy right now. Now, Mannadium finds itself in an interesting spot. Players are starting to realize that Droll and Logbird against a good Snake Eyes player, not good. Especially if they're playing pure Snake Eyes and not Fire Kings, you're in deep trouble. With that being said, players are starting to side Droll and Logbird or not even play Droll and Logbird, which bodes well for this strategy. The only bad thing I would have to say is that Nibiru is taking a rise, and with Nibiru combined with another negation card like Infinite Impermanence, you can stop a Mannadium board. The best thing about it is that this deck can play through a ton of interruptions, so if I had to put it in a particular spot, I think I'm going to put it still into the next best. Now, personally, I would say that Mannadium is one of the weakest of the next best, and if we were to go in order, it would probably be something like this. It's a deck that in the right hands can win multiple regionals and I think can top a YCS too. It has all of the qualities there as it makes a ton of hand traps look completely stupid, and if players play less counters to this deck, the stronger it becomes. One thing I do want to say is Super Polymerization could ruin this deck and is fairly decent against Snake Eyes, so that's one thing you have to look out for. And that would be the same thing for Centurion. Centurion finds itself in a really interesting spot too. It plays under cards like Nibiru the Primal Being and Droll and Logbird, Droll and Logbird being a card that may be phased out, but also has the ability to summon Hot Red Dragon Archfiend Calamity, which completely shuts out a Snake Eyes Yu-Gi-Oh deck. As you already know, the Snake Eyes strategy is extremely monster dependent, so Centurion can have a shot. Right now, I'm going to put Centurion in the Can Compete faction, and if I had to put these in order, I would put it like you, and like that. I think Centurion is incredibly slept on. It may even be a YCS topping type Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Players have already figured out that True King of all calamities isn't the end all be all, but just like how branded is, when you go against a deck like Snake Eyes, you have a win condition that automatically wins you the game. Now Yugioh, bro, I gotta say, Yugioh can come in different forms. You can play the branded Yugioh, you can play Unchained Yugioh, but regardless, I think all versions of Yugioh, even pure, are in the Can Compete. I am a believer. Like I said before, Super Polymerization is one of the most incredible cards in the game right now if the format stays at the same trajectory. Yugioh has the ability to Super Polymerization on your opponent's turn without Super Polymerization. I also like that this deck is getting more future support to make it even crazier. Right now, I'm going to put it in Can Compete. We've been seeing Yugioh and Yugioh variants do very well, and I hope to continue to see that success because this is a GX strategy I have a ton of respect for. Goblin Biker pretty much fell off the face of the earth. We have not seen a singular Goblin Biker top at a regional level or above. Now, for right now, I don't think that that's a huge cause for concern. We know that this deck will get more support in the future, and right now it's not bad, but I would say either low regionals / definitely a locals-based Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Goblin Biker doesn't have a ton of ways to combat the Snake Eyes Fire King strategy unless it goes first, meaning that it can attach your opponent's cards, preventing them from getting into the graveyard again. But I think one of the biggest problems with Goblin Biker is going second against a lot of the strategies. Rica Arrow Mage. This deck, holy God. Now, in the Americas, this deck is notoriously not a topping deck. So I think we'd probably have to wait until a European event comes around for us to see this deck at its fullest stage. I think right now Rica could be in the highest version of Takes a Good Pilot. It just proves that innovators that play this strategy can take the deck far, where other people just eat glue and try to focus on making this huge board that gets destroyed by most of the decks. Now, Vanquish Soul is one of my favorite decks, but that's not going to stop me from judging this deck as appropriately as I judge the others. The good thing about Vanquish Soul is that it's really adept at making cards like Abyss Dweller, slowing down the game. Also, once this deck gets into Razin, it's almost GG's if it can resolve the effect consistently. I think that Vanquish Soul is another one of those Yu-Gi-Oh strategies that can compete incredibly well. You will see this throughout the course of multiple regionals and maybe even a YCS top here and there. It's a deck that is incredibly skilled, giving you the utility to play against every deck, but doesn't necessarily hone in as being an incredibly good strategy against any one Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Now, Kashtira has secretly been one of the most consistent decks in the game, being able to utilize Unicorn to get rid of the Fire King Snake Eye strategy's most important extra deck cards, Fenrir to banish them face down to never see them again, and Burst to be able to control their graveyard. This is easily one of the next best Yu-Gi-Oh decks in the game, and it actually leads when it comes to tops out of all of the decks, not Snake Eyes Fire King or branded. Kashtira just might be the best dimension shifter Yu-Gi-Oh deck in the game, which already bodes well against the Snake Eye strategy. Now, Exo Stepsisters. Exo Sisters are God. Okay, so on one hand, I think Exo Sisters have all of the ability to stop decks like Snake Eyes. Think about it. Anytime they move a card out of a graveyard, that is a free Stepsister to your field. The bad side, the deck's power crop. I actually want to give Stepsisters an in-depth try in this format, but for right now, I'm going to say Takes a really good pilot. The deck does have tools to be good, but is it enough tools? And with Nibiru being around, being able to go full Exo Sister combo seems a little risky. Lastly is Fluundereeze. I would say probably is the second best dimension shifter deck. It also has the same tools that Exo Sister has, access to cards like Evenly Match and Dimension Shifter, of course, but also has a blowout Yu-Gi-Oh card that can compete, and Harpy's Featherstorm. Fluundereeze is easily one of the next best Yu-Gi-Oh decks, and I'm going to put it right there. I think that this strategy is completely incredible right now, but don't tell Bird that I said all this. She'll want to play it more. And that's all that I have for the meta tier list post Costa Rica and events that happened over the weekend. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to watch all of the ads on TheCaliEffect and also check out these other videos so I can catch you on the next one.